Yeah. How's it going?
I'm doing good. How are you?
Good. Yeah, I saw your name and I remember your posts on the Edgar Cayce Revelation Study Group. So
Yeah, kind of.
in my mind, I was thinking one day I'm going to have to talk to this guy.
I'm obsessed, essentially.
Well, that's why I need to talk to you about it. Because I am
Yeah,
obsessed as well.
it's uh, yeah. I don't even know how to begin. Um, Essentially, I'm a Buddhist monk.
Yeah, I've seen
I
photos of you in
Yeah,
this.
and I've been involved in metaphysics since a very young age, 12 years old, when I had my near-death experience, and that didn't really lead anywhere until 2000, July of 2000.
Okay.
And I was going to move into a monastery over in Seattle, up in Seattle, if you look at a map, in April, and that fell through. And so I basically just sat down and said, my, whatever you want to call it, guides, whatever, assholes, you keep telling me this shit, but you don't give me anything worth anything, you know? I was pretty blunt with them. And I literally I was reading a book one day. I was doing a tarot course actually with James Wanless that I never have finished. And I was also reading this book called You Too Can See the Light or something like that by Marilyn Morrissey or something. I can't remember the exact name, but she claimed that she could ask questions and get answers like you experience on the other side, which was an intriguing thought. And I was like, well, okay, let's try that. So I did. I just basically said, okay, what's the deepest hardcore question you can ask of whatever you want to call it, the light, God, the source, whatever, you know? I was like, okay. And what came to mind was, if everything's perfect in the beginning, why create? Where's the motivation to create? And of course, I didn't get an answer of kind of stupid idea, I guess, at first, but I kept asking it for some reason for 2 weeks. And I don't know if I was going schizo or what, but one day I was sitting there, I'm working on my tarot course, and I literally hear this voice over my right shoulder, and it's basically said, I created because I could. And I was like, I looked over my right shoulder to see if somebody was talking to me. Nobody was there. Nobody visible anyway. But it kept talking. And I'm like, is this in my head? Is it out of my head? What's the story here? You know, I was like, okay, well, whatever. Anyways, basically it just said that it was in its nature to create. It's just the way it is. I was like, okay, fine. And then it disappeared.
Okay.
So I'm like, okay, I'm wanting it to talk, but it's not talking. So I'm not schizo, maybe. I don't know, but we'll see. And I got really mad because after a few minutes, I thought, sorry for swearing, but what an effing arrogant answer. Of course, it's God, so why wouldn't it be, right? But, and so I basically said in my head, I said, well, wait a minute. I don't want to just know why you created. I want to know how you created. And all of a sudden this voice pops back in out of nowhere and says, well, that wasn't the original question, and then disappeared again. So I thought, well, it worked the first time, I'll do it again. 2 weeks went by, I kept asking every day, you know, like a meditation kind of thing. And I'm sitting there working on my tarot course yet again. And this voice shows up and says, take a piece of typing paper out of your printer. It's like, okay. Fold it in half. I'm like, okay. I'm sitting there going, okay, what next? And he goes, okay, so I open it up. This is me in the beginning before I created. Now fold it. And fold it. This is me after I created. This is how I created. I folded in upon myself an infinite number of times until I forgot myself. The one became many. Just sitting there going, what the hell? You know, I mean, I don't know where this is coming from, but I'm like, it makes sense. It's kind of freaking me out a little bit, you know? And so I stopped it. I just willfully stopped it. I just said, this is making too much sense. So then I spent probably a good 3 years studying different things, physics, metaphysics, all kinds of things. Somewhere soon after that second experience, I came up with, I don't know if it was me that came up with it or somebody else, because I didn't keep a journal, which I really wish I would have. But I came up with 3 laws: the law of love, the law of karma, the law of grace. And I didn't really know what they meant, but I looked it up on Google, because everything's looked up on Google these days on the internet. And the only thing that came up was Edgar Cayce.
Okay.
And I was like, okay, so I'll study Edgar Cayce. Well, that was 25 years ago. Close to that. And I'm like, I didn't realize what I was getting into. So then I have this dream. I call it a dream because the body was asleep. And in this so-called dream, I'm in this classroom. I can sense other people in the room, but I can't see them. And I know there's a teacher at the front of the class, but I can't necessarily see them either. But the one thing I do see very clearly in the dream was this papyrus or wood scroll with this symbol on it of a triangle on top of a square on top of an equilateral cross. All the symbols are equilateral. And as I looked at this, the person or whatever it was in the front of the class teaching the class said that the line at the bottom of the triangle, the top of the square, was faded or dotted, however you want to put it, because of the cross. And at that point, the phone in real world, I guess you could call it that, rang, and I wrote this symbol down in a hurry. There's a big part of me that goes, why the hell did I do that? So as I looked at that symbol, I'm going, okay, there's 3 parts here. But in the original experience with the voice or whatever you want to call it, I'd only received 2 symbols. And the way I describe that experience as 2 symbols is the paper open or flat is an I, and the paper folded is a V. And I'm going, well, where's the 3rd symbol? So I did it again, 3rd time. I basically just begged. I was like, come on, this has to have something behind it that makes sense. And this isn't making sense. So I did this mantra thing where I just kept asking the question over and over and over again, probably like, okay, fine, I'll answer, shut up or something, you know, I don't know. But you know, like a kid does when you're young and you're trying to question your parents, you know, eventually you wear your parents down. So sitting there doing the tarot cards, 3rd time, and this voice shows up again. It says, take the piece of paper out. I'm like, okay. Draw the triangle, the square, and the cross on the piece of paper so that the top of the triangle is at one end of the paper and the vertical line on the cross is at the bottom of the paper. I'm like, okay. She's now rolled into a cylinder. I'm like, okay. And I looked at it and it's stunned me at the time. It still kind of bothers me a little bit being a Buddhist and, you know, having the past that I have with the church, etc. But it becomes essentially the symbol of a church. The cross goes on top of the triangle. And the O is the 3rd symbol, the IBO, triangle, square, and cross. So that really pushed me into going, okay, well, what exactly do these symbols mean?
Mm.
And I was already guided toward Edgar Cayce, so I thought, okay, well, we'll just start that process. So, when you get into the readings and Edgar Cayce stuff, initially you look at it and you go, ugh, it's just humongous.
Yeah, there's a lot of
I
work.
mean, it's amazing what that man was able to produce in a trance state that, honestly, I don't know if he understood it himself in its entirety. I feel, based on my reading of him and some of the biographies, that he didn't necessarily understand what was coming through entirely.
Yeah, I think his conscious mind was trying to work out what was going on.
I mean, if it wasn't for a computer, I wouldn't even begin to understand it. It's that deep. But the process of studying him and really getting into just those three laws of love, karma, and grace, Edgar was the one who defined those. The law of love is giving. It's essentially what this voice said to begin with. It's in the nature of source to give of itself. And if you look at the Bible and Edgar's teachings, God is love. So he's going to give that of himself, right? That's how he created.
But he did give the best of himself. It wasn't like a little given. He gave the best. That was
he gave all of himself, because there was nothing else to give. I mean, literally, he had to give of himself. So, but my understanding as I've read this is that because he also gave all the souls free will, there was always the potential for the souls to realize their free will. So my understanding is the minds of the souls, or my definition of soul is mind. There's no difference between those two in my understanding. A lot of people look at the mind as a function of the soul. I don't really see the separation, or at least I haven't found it yet. My understanding of Edgar's readings is that the soul consists of spirit, mind, and will. And then as I read deeper, you can qualify those three as superconscious spirit, subconscious mind, and conscious will. But we didn't really, then you get into the biblical symbolism, if you will, of Christ as being the first soul that was created. And this is where you start getting into the history, if you will, of Edgar. So Edgar really, he started out doing medical readings. And I think that was a way of kind of opening people's minds up to the idea that you could receive intuitive or extrasensory information and have it be accurate. And then that evolved into what he called life readings, people's past lives as being the cause of present life illnesses. And I think if he had lived long enough, he probably would have gone a step further into and he did to a great degree, by implication, of spiritual dynamics or spiritual laws as manifested in the physical world. I don't think that he did that explicitly, but he certainly did it by implication, or whatever his source was. So then when you look at the readings and you look at the history, Edgar's story, if you will, or history, really goes from the beginning of the souls all the way up till Abraham. And then he pretty much uses the Bible from there as it's written. When I looked at this whole philosophy of Edgar, I said to myself, okay, number one, it can't be harmful. And number two, it has to make intellectual sense on some level. It can't just be an intuitive sense. It has to be something that can be applied and practical in a person's everyday life. If it's not, then it's useless.
Mm.
You get a lot of, in the metaphysical movement, you get a lot of mumbo jumbo and stuff that just doesn't
Yeah,
really fly.
yeah. I think your brain's trying to compute and it's going, I don't know what.
Yeah, it sounds good.
Yeah.
It's like the Bible says, it's sweet to the taste, but bitter in the digestion. You know, that's the way I look at a lot of metaphysical stuff these days. Is it's nice, that's great, but if it's not practical, forget it. It's useless.
Mm.
And that's the one thing I can say about Edgar's readings is when you get deep enough into them,
Yeah.
they're not just intellectually satisfying, but they're actually physically practical. They're things that you can apply in your life on a relationship level, at least, to benefit yourself and others. So that qualification was met. But Edgar goes into, the creation of the souls. And my understanding is that Christ created the first soul, which I define as Christ. And Christ basically didn't deviate from the plan, if you will, didn't actually realize his free will in the spiritual realms. And then through him, like a window, all other souls were created. Who knows what that number might have been? Doesn't really matter, I guess. But in Edgar's story, there was a second soul, if you will, that did realize his free will, which we have named Satan. And that soul then kind of like deviated from the plan, like a very slow arc away from a straight line. And my understanding is that when Satan realized his free will, two things happened. On an outer level, the white light, source energy, whatever you want to call it, polarized. Light became dark, white became black, spirit became matter. Not in a physical sense, like, knock on wood type thing yet, but in a very, very subtle way, spirit became matter and began to condense. And all these souls, some that had followed Christ and some that had followed Satan, were all looking at this thing. It's like a bubble within a bubble, if you will. If you look at God as one large bubble, and then inside that bubble, there's another bubble called matter. So the souls looked at matter and went, wow, that's really cool. You have earth, water, fire, air, and you have minerals, plants, and animals, however you want to categorize things. But we looked at these animals that had evolved on the planet Earth, which is the epitome of condensed matter, for humans at least, and went, wow, those animals are doing some fun shit down there. They're having sex. Let's try that, right? Yeah. So souls basically took on these four elements of earth, water, fire, and air and created bodies for themselves. But in that process, they mutated the creational patterns of matter. So instead of simply observing matter to recognize our separation from God or source, we literally indwelt it or incarnated into it, which then necessitated this whole process of evolution for the soul, essentially. We then, as souls, entered the earth in what I call Pangea, was when that originally happened, and then Lemuria, and then Atlantis. So it's not necessarily talked about in the Edgar Cayce foundations or just in general. It's been very difficult to find any information on it. I've kind of worked it out myself. and correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't been able to find it anywhere else, is a real discussion of what Edgar talks about when he talks about the 5 root races.
Yeah,
Now, it's in theosophical movements.
yeah.
This idea of the root races, Madame Blavatsky and her ascended masters and that kind of thing. So I'm pretty sure that at some point Edgar was introduced on some level to that information, but who knows? Or they were privy to the same source.
But is it the 5 root? Is that to do with the skin color or?
Yes, it did. In fact,
yeah.
The first root race was all the souls observing matter. They came down to Earth, they looked at it, they went, wow, having sex, let's do that. Lucifer's group decided they were going to indwell matter in order to do that. And they did that in Lemuria. And so that was the second root race. They continued that at the beginning of Atlantis. And then at that point, that Christ soul that Edgar called Emilius decided to incarnate about midway through the Atlantean history. And
that's about 200,000 years ago, I think that's.
Yeah, approximately 250,000 years ago.
Yeah.
And so Lucifer, I call Satan and Lucifer are the same soul, but Satan is outside of matter, Lucifer is inside matter. There's a tradition of name changing depending on which dimension you're in. So Lucifer was actually the forerunner of the second root race. And Emilius, who we define as the Christ soul, is the forerunner of the third root race in Atlantis. Now, Edgar talks about how in Atlantis, the third root race incarnated in 5 different places.
But to go back, isn't that there was a split between the sons of Belial and
the children of light? Yeah, there was a split. That didn't occur at first.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So
so that's you're talking, that's the second root race thing. The 2 main divisions.
The 2 main divisions actually occurred in Atlantis.
Yeah.
In the third root race.
Third root race, okay.
Right. So then, at least that's my understanding. And so then
the
Emilius incarnated in 5 different places. I'm not sure if the soul itself incarnated in 5 different places, you know, or if it just was an example or a pattern that this group of souls entered the world, the earth, these positive souls, if you will, entered the earth in 5 different areas, and Emilius was specific to Atlantis. And that's my suspicion. But then there was this split between the 2 groups, the sons of Belial, and Belial was actually an incarnation of Lucifer, and was very much motivated by that ideal of selfishness and you know, the earth is created for us to use and abuse. Common theme in the human race.
Still happening.
Yeah, still happening. But basically, Emilius then, an interesting thing came up within my study of Edgar Cayce was he talks, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this was my explanation based on what I received, was that the soul, the third root race, was able to project, they realized there was a problem with taking on matter to create bodies for themselves. And so they had created this second method, if you will, of projecting out of themselves the negative quality of themselves. So the Atlanteans, this third root race that incarnated, would project their negative aspect outward to create a body into which another soul would incarnate.
Mm.
So that there was this different form of a body.
Mm.
We call these light bodies, if you will. They're kind of not necessarily as physical as the bodies that were created by what I call the Luciferians, or the second root race. It was kind of an in-between state. And my understanding is that when the soul incarnated into this projected body, that soul was then under the control of the person projecting it. So Emilius had projected his negative aspect, into which Lilith then incarnated. Initially, that was his initial fall, if you will, of enslaving her within that body. But then quickly realized his mistake, and she became his helpmeet, something like that. Basically his helper. They then, kind of like the yin and yang, if you will, of a soul, she then incarnated in later lifetimes with him. So anyways, Atlantis sank. There were 3 basic sinkings of Atlantis that left initially. With the first sinking, it was, I believe, 5 islands, if you will. And with the second sinking, which was about 28,000 BC, the first one was 50,000 BC, the second one was 28,000 BC. And then the third one left only 3 islands, with Poseidia, which is what we call Bimini Islands now. And there's a lot of, I would call it anecdotal, but nothing truly objective, evidence that there is an advanced civilization under the water there. There's 3 pyramids, but there's also a lot of evidence around the world of the use of pyramids and crystals and so forth. So that kind of verified the history for me.
So what about that 10,500 BC when they migrated to Egypt, when they built the pyramid?
Well, they had actually migrated at various periods. With the second sinking of Atlantis, they began the migration into other areas. That's where, and in fact, it kind of coincides with the ideal of those 5 projections. At the time of Emilius's incarnation, they then went to Peru, they went to the Yucatan, they went to the Pyrenees Mountains, Egypt, so forth, in order to preserve their, and it became intensified even after the final sinking. Because
there's a lot of the readings talking. There are a lot of the readings that are talking about that time, 10,500 BC, where they're trying to get rid of all the body part, animal body parts. And
right, they had created in Egypt. They had started the process in Atlantis. My understanding is that process started in Atlantis and then moved over into Egypt. And during the time of Rata, which is an incarnation of Edgar, Edgar was Rata. I'm pronouncing that name right. That he had developed 2 temples there in order to rehabilitate, if you will, the fixtures and monstrosities.
I mean, they were all souls, but I don't know, maybe different looking.
Right, they're all souls. They're all souls, but they're incarnated into different bodies. So the monstrosities were the souls that had incarnated into these bodies that were made of these different elements. And the mixtures were the souls that had incarnated into bodies that had been mutated and enslaved by the Atlanteans. So there's this idea within Edgar's readings of the inappropriateness of violating another soul's free will. It's prime law. Do not violate another person's free will, even if you feel like it's the mistake on their part. So anyways, Atlantis sank, done deal. Egypt became the focus at that point. And then from there, with the story of Rata and Enoch, etc., and the building of the pyramid. Then the final sinking of Atlantis after they built the Great Pyramid as an encoded, in their minds, eternal message to the future generations that this could happen again. Somewhere in
and then they I don't know when they buried all this the information under the Sphinx, the records. That's the interesting part. All the records.
Hall of Records.
Yeah, Hall of Records. There's 3 places, and we still haven't opened them. I don't know what's going on
in
there.
the Yucatan and in the Egypt, and there's one other place I can't think
And
of.
Bimini, that's something
Bimini,
that's going to come up.
So honestly, my feeling is there's only one that you need.
Yeah, to open.
There is only one that you need. Emil, when I looked at the readings, Lucifer's the forerunner of the second root race. Emilius is the forerunner of the third root race. Adam and Eve, if you will, was the, you could say Emilius and Lilith, Adam and Eve, so forth, was the forerunner of the fourth root race.
Okay.
And I got to thinking about that, and I'm going, this is starting to make way more sense than I thought it would. All through this whole process, it's making way too much sense. And Jesus, when you look at the Old Testament, it's basically a testament about the fourth root race. It talks about the different lifetimes of Jesus, Melchizedek, Joseph, Joshua, so forth. Developing various qualities within his soul up to the point of becoming Jesus. And even as Jesus, he was still developing. Jesus was the forerunner of the fifth root race.
Okay, yeah.
But that process of incarnating as the fifth root race seems to have been interrupted. But I'm not sure if it was on purpose or not, because if you think about Jesus as a forerunner of the fifth root race, and then Edgar says the fifth root race begins to incarnate in 1998. And they're continuing to incarnate. I believe they're continuing to incarnate. But as I get deeper into this symbol, because that's what it's all about for me, is what's the symbol mean? The book of Revelation, to me, at this point, is the essence of Edgar's teaching. The history supports it. I've been able through the readings to define what the triangle means: time, space, patience, Son, Father, Holy Ghost, so forth. And then the square, that took me a bit longer, but it's basically this idea of the 4 elements, but also the elements of selfishness that's defined as propagation, sustenance,
propagation,
preservation, gratification. Now, the interesting thing, and I haven't been able to talk to her, Herbert Puryear, but I've noticed that for whatever reason, Herbert Puryear reverses the propagation and sustenance.
Okay, yeah.
But there's been no real explanation for it. He did explain to me, thankfully, during a Zoom seminar.
Oh, yeah. I actually watched that. When that question was asked, I said, there's only one person that was asking that question. I knew it. I knew it. Yeah, no one else.
I was like, what the heck? Why this reversal of,
Yeah.
And then he answered it. I was like, oh, these are bypass prayers. Now I get it. Okay, fine. And then as I've gotten deeper into this, just a couple weeks ago, or about a month ago now, I guess, I was reading the book by Iron. I call him Iron. Ever Iron. on his explanation of Revelations, and I was reading this one very small sentence in the middle of chapter 7. In fact, I was just looking at it a few minutes ago. Let's see, where is it? There it is. And it's very small, and I've read this book like 10 times. I'm on my 11th reading of it. That's how obsessed I am, because I'm going to break this darn thing down into something that makes sense to me. But he says very simply, very subtly, just on page 181 of the book, he says, a vibration is composed of the 3 elements of spirit, mind, and purpose.
Okay.
I'm going, triangle. Duh. He says, since Jacob had 12 sons, considered as manifested ideas or influences, which relate to other ideas springing from the same source, there is a correlation to the evolutionary forces in this. He then refers to time, space, and patience, again, the triangle, as measures of understanding.
I got a book in front of me here now. 180, what page is it?
181.
Oh, 180. Oh, yeah.
I don't know if there's a softback version, but there's definitely a hardback, and I have 3.
Yeah. Yeah, this is the
time,
because
space,
the 12
and
tribes. It's about
he's talking about the 12 tribes. I've gone from diagramming this thing out with Word that didn't seem to work very well, and then I switched to Excel. Now I'm using Photoshop. It says time, space, and patience as measures of understanding, which to me is the triangle. Moving through the 4 elements, earth, water, fire, and air, square, equal the 12 sons of Jacob as manifested ideas. I'm looking at that and I was like, it didn't dawn on me. And then all of a sudden it just like somebody turned on a light and I'm going, holy shit, that's the key. If you look at the square and then you look at the cross, it implies that there's some transformation of the square into the cross.
Okay.
And what Iron is talking about is transforming these 4 elements of selfishness, essentially, into something unselfish, but within the body. And I was like, that's a total trip. So I start diagramming it out on my Excel program, and I'm like, okay, so self-sustenance, if you take it as, it's here.
Yeah.
Basically the selves, the 4 selves, the 4 beasts are transformed by the 4 horsemen into the 4 influences. So I'm looking at this and I'm going, okay, so you have the 4 beasts are the glands. The 7 seals are the hormones themselves. And the trumpets are the effects of those hormones on the body. The process of purification or spiritualization.
Edgar Cayce does say when he was asked sounding of what is the sound? It was it was that actual experience that's happening.
Right. He's talking about essentially, then I start running into this other thing about, and I've studied Taoism and stuff like that because being Buddhist, etc. Essentially what's a Christianized internal alchemy. I was like, oh, this is getting really trippy. I was like, this from a symbol that I got in a dream. It blows my mind. I was just writing out today this idea that I just read to you on page 181. That's essentially the essence of the 12 tribes of Israel, or the 7th chapter. And I was like, this is what the first half of Revelation is the purification of the body.
That's because I've split it up into 2 parts. The 1 to 11 and then 12 to 22.
Mhm.
And they sort
That's
of,
exactly what it is.
yeah.
And the one question that I've come up with in the last 2 weeks, which has been really weird, is, and I think I've solved it a little bit as I've worked it out. I was like, okay, so are the seals? My intuition keeps telling me, or this voice, or whatever you want to call it, it's more my intuition though, it's not an external voice, is telling me that this purification process occurs in 3 stages. This purification of the physical body occurs in 3 stages. And I was looking at it, the seals would be the first stage. Chapter 7, where it talks about these 4 influences, would be the second stage. And then the third stage would be the trumpets themselves. But as I'm digging deeper a little bit, I'm looking at it, I'm going, no, that physical purification process has to be just with the trumpets. It has to be just with the trumpets, because the first 4 trumpets would be the 144,000 purified. And then the second 144,000 would be the 5th chakra, or the first woe, and the second one would be the second woe. So my thought on it, I was looking at this chart that I have on the 12 tribes.
Oh, you mean the one that Helen
I put it on there.
and
I think.
Gladys? Is that the one?
Well,
Gladys
it's kind of that, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's based on Gladys's work as well. You could also put it to Puryear's interpretation too. It's a little harder with Puryear's interpretation, because in the commentary, Gladys and so forth, they actually describe that movement of energy through these 12 tribes, if you will, or 12 areas of the body, which I really appreciated. I don't know that I could necessarily translate Puryear's interpretation into that. It'd be very difficult anyway. But when I look at the trumpets, he keeps talking about a third, a third, a third, a third, a third. And they mentioned that to some degree with the 4 horsemen as well, in terms of, you know, what they're destroying or what they're purifying, etc. They keep mentioning a thirds. The implication is that the 144,000 is a third, which means then that there would be 432,000 altogether. So that 144,000 would be the first third. The second third would be another 144,000, and then the third would be another 144,000 to purify all the cells within the body. Because there's this implication when they talk about the slain martyrs in the 5th seal. They're the result of the 4 horsemen. Purifying 144,000 cells in the body that are then held back or under the altar. They're under our will, according to Iron. We hold them back in order to, and they're held back in order for us to have a free will. And then, but that implies then that they're transformed into, I'm not sure exactly, are they a second 144,000 or are they the same? I would say that the slain souls and the 144,000 are the same. Because what he's describing in chapter 7 is a description of those that were sealed. He says, those that were sealed. I'm like, okay, so that means then that he's describing the first 144,000 in chapter 7. It's not a second grouping of 144,000 until you get to the trumpets. So then he then, you know, and Iron says it that, you know, the effect of the trumpets is not just physical, it's also mental, it's also spiritual. And so that's where you get into the later chapters of Revelations.
Yes.
To me, like a lot of people online on the Edgar Cayce groups, I belong to two or three of them, they seem to keep bringing up this idea that Revelations is all about physical predictions.
No.
And I disagree with that to a huge degree because, again, we have free will. God said, you can make this garden a heaven or you can make it a hell.
Yeah.
Obviously, we tend to make it a hell. And I think if God was to come back and go, what the heck are you people doing with this place? I mean, like,
Yeah, because
what the heck?
when I looked at Revelation, it's too structured to be anything. It's like a program, but if you follow it, then it's like a software program. You know, if you
Right,
understand.
exactly.
Yeah, and that's what it's not
This is the hardware, the body.
Yeah. And
But this internal alchemy is a way of rewriting our program.
yeah, and that's I looked at it and it's just so structured, so you can
It's
like,
making way too much sense.
Yeah.
That's what's been amazing to me. But it's taken a lot of work to get there. And I honestly do not understand why it hasn't been written out a little more clearly.
or even discussed openly with, like this is no, what I mean is like officially, like I've looked around, it's only, like you, me, other people sort of say it now and then.
I'm sure it's been studied. I know Puryear has studied it in depth.
Yeah.
But in terms, I mean, even his latest book, as good as it is written very convolutedly,
Yeah.
unfortunately. And I'm not criticizing his writing or anything, but and I've noticed this with a lot of authors. This isn't just Edgar Cayce's stuff. This is with the Conversations with God. It's with the Course in Miracles.
Yeah, but I don't bother reading any.
They confuse it. Whatever the source is, as great as it is, the human mind tends to muddle it.
Yeah.
And I'm one of these people. I like simplicity. I like, okay, this is it, this is it, this is it. So like, as an example of that, a very clear example of it, unfortunately for me, was I was sitting here one day and deep in the study of Everett Iron's book and so forth, and Puryear's book and so forth. And the voice showed up again, and it was like, whoa, because there wasn't any questioning involved ahead of time. It was just me studying. And it said, well, where did the law come from? And I had to stop and go, well, it came from God. Well, what is God? It was basically asking me to define what God was. And I was just going, and I was kind of nonplussed about it. I'm like, how do I define what God is? I'm like, okay, spirit, great. He goes, well, if there's three laws, there's three qualities to God. And I had to think about it. I'm like, oh, you gave that to me a long time ago, and I can't remember what it was. And then I was going through my notes, and the definition of God, according to my near-death experience, it wasn't necessarily what the voice had said, but when I had my near-death experience, it was out of context. I didn't really understand what I had experienced because I was only 12 and I was indoctrinated in a very fundamentalist Christian church, and everybody else is going to hell except you because you're saved kind of attitude and mentality and so forth. And I rejected it as an adult and as a young teenager, but especially after my near-death experience. But as I tried to understand what I had experienced on the other side, I defined this light as having three qualities: love, light, and life. And that really, for me, defines what God is. Love, light, and life express these three laws: love, karma, and grace. as time, space, and patience, or the three qualities of the soul: spirit, mind, and will. And then from there, the story goes on, and then
the other thing is because when like I was saying, between 1 and 11, Revelation 1 to 11, because then up to 11 it talks about the two witness, and the two witness are our past lives, which is there's some memory going on in our body. It's sitting there that we can, I don't know, it's there, but we don't know how to access it and bring it out clearly. Then our sort of soul journeys in other planets, that's there as well. So those are the two. But that's probably inside your subconscious. So all this meditation and chanting and all going on is bringing out these vibrations. And because when we go to another planet, we don't go as a physical body, we go as some form of energy or something, some soul, I don't know what it is, but we experience things there on a mental level, and then we come back to Earth, and it's there somewhere as memory, but we don't. It's built in. So I think all this counting and everything it's all about that.
The churches are subconscious memories.
Yeah,
he's talking about, okay, when you look at Revelation, or at least when I look at Revelation, I'm looking at that going, these are astrological influences, which he also correlates with in between life sojourns.
Yeah, but that's us going there.
Those memories are stored in our subconscious minds.
Yeah, but
positive and negative qualities, etc. And then the beasts, and what I call the Son of Man, chapter 4, chapter 5, are, according to Iron, the way that we create conscious memories.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is
earth, water, fire, and air as.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is when we go there, we go as a soul, we do something there while we're away from Earth, and something happens to us, we either grow, carrying on growing.
Yeah, we come back.
And then we come back with all that, energy and knowledge that we built up somewhere, and then we test it on Earth.
One of the witnesses is what you say, the subconscious mind, or the
superconscious or whatever.
Right. And the second memory is our conscious mind.
Yeah. So those
because we're witnessing, those two witnesses, subconscious and the conscious mind, witness the superconscious.
Yeah.
Which is the Son of Man.
Yeah.
Or those three elements of spirit, mind, and will.
So when somebody says, "Oh, I experienced I went some past life," then they're just going to some form of memory that, okay, I was there and I was doing this and this. So they open up some memory. And
that's what I like about the movie Matrix.
Yeah.
If you look at that simply as Neo experiencing memories, it's a real good allegory for what Edgar is talking about. We're essentially memories in the making.
Oh yeah, experience.
Right?
Yeah, we're creating
memory in the making, and we are simply re-experiencing or recalling in the present moment. We are recalling something that's already occurred.
Yeah, and that's why things happen to you because
we become a lucid dreamer or a lucid memory. That's what he's talking about in his teachings, is how to become essentially a lucid dreamer.
Because some of us live on a pattern. We just do the same pattern. I did it yesterday. The same. No, it's the same pattern.
That's one of my main questions. How do you break that pattern? I stopped after I did the history of Edgar, so to speak, his whole history, the story of his history, historical story. I stopped at that point. Because whatever it is that's guiding this research said, oh, you need to stop. You need to, before you go to the next phase, you need to have a better understanding of the mind. I'm like, okay, God help me. That's going to take a while. A whole another 10 years, 15 years. But I was lucky because I found Dr. Joe Dispenza.
Oh, yeah.
And Dr. Joe Dispenza has a very, I don't necessarily agree with everything he says, but he has a really clear presentation of how the mind works.
Okay.
And the mind essentially, like Edgar says, is superconscious, subconscious, and conscious. And but there's a barrier between the subconscious and the subconscious. And you know, Edgar talks about it as a ladder. We 7 chakras, etc. You know, you ascend the ladder. But it's also can be a barrier between those two minds.
Yeah, I think I remember one part. There's one reading where he said it was like one of those curtain springs that just springs up and down. Or,
yeah, it's the ladder to ascend, basically, to the. By recalling subconscious memories, the superconscious begins to have an influence. But one of the things that Joe Dispenza really brought to mind was this idea of when you're born, you have basically an open mind. Your conscious mind is essentially external to yourself. It's your parents, your authority figures. And then when you reach 7 to 12 years old, you start to develop or internalize that conscious mind, and you begin to analyze things. But it's what I call the no and yes mind. The subconscious initially is your yes mind. It basically absorbs anything and everything. But then when you develop the conscious mind, it begins to say no. And those roles flip. So that when you reach adulthood, your conscious mind is going, yeah, I want that car. I want this. I want that. You know, I want to be happy. I want to live a fulfilled life. Right? That's our yes mind at that point. But the subconscious mind has now been programmed to become the no mind. It's going to tell you all the negative things about why you can't have those things.
I want to say something about all that what you're saying, because I think a lot of people know that, and maybe the church people, and then they program all these young people into.
Right. The problem is,
they
haven't really figured out how to explain how to reprogram it.
Yeah.
That's the problem. When you get, it's interesting to me because everybody that I've read, and I mean, I've read a lot of people, when they talk about reprogramming the mind, or when they talk about spirituality, they're essentially talking about hypnosis. When I looked at hypnosis, I went from Dr. Joe Dispenza right into hypnosis itself. And I was like, okay, so our understanding of the human mind is only about 200 years old, give or take, you know, in terms of a defined theory. And everything else after that is simply a verification of it. We have fMRIs, we have all this equipment, we can put dye in the brain and watch where the blood flow goes when we think and all this other stuff, you know, measure brain waves, etc. It's getting a little more advanced as we go along, I hope. But it really hasn't, in terms of public knowledge, there really isn't all that much out there. They've said that you have a yes and a no mind, but how do you get the no mind to say yes? They haven't figured that out. My understanding of hypnosis is the first step is to simply close your eyes. That's essentially what Edgar did.
Because that's a lot of information come through your eyes.
Yeah, essentially all the physical world comes, and all your conditioning about the physical world primarily comes through your eyes. So the first step is simply to close your eyes. When you close your eyes and you focus upward, you essentially drop from beta to alpha instantaneously. As you drop into theta, you begin to visualize. And as you drop down into delta, if you can maintain consciousness at that point, you become aware of the emotion behind the experience, behind the visualization. So, for example, when you talk about manifesting, one of the things I think is fascinating with humans right now, and I say this objectively, is that as we enter a phase in our experience where survival is in question, the majority of us are still stuck in survival mode, and we're playing old programs. You see that with the political system right now around the world, is they're playing from old programming essentially. But there are others.
Yeah, that I interrupt the even the schools. Like my son's going to school, and they're still learning the things that we learned 40 years ago, like biology, and it's stuck on that. And they're going like, it's not. And they come out of school, and you can't apply what you learned there in real life. So they haven't.
Yeah, what are you going to do? You know, you just go, okay. I think there needs to be a balance between the external learning and the internal learning.
Yeah.
There really needs to be a balance. There's a gentleman, part of the reason why I've stayed with this study as long as I have is because I really want to understand how the physical becomes physical. That original question of how did God or source create from non-physical into physical? How do we as souls do that? You know, and so within the last 25 years or so, there's been this focus on, well, as we've developed our understanding of the mind, there's also been this theory of manifesting or thinking reality into being. And they've kind of dovetailed each other in a non-quote unquote scientific way. There's been pseudoscience involved, of course, but as time has gone on, I think we're getting closer to making it scientific. The powers that be have known about it from day one, but they're not telling the general public. I do believe that there's some, I'm not a conspiracy theory person per se, but I do believe something is manipulating the human race. I don't know what that something is, but something on a mass scale is manipulating the human race towards something in the future. When you look at the predictions of the past, there's a little bit too much there to say there's nothing there. Not enough to really define what that something is that's doing the manipulating. But this idea of the fifth root race, when you look at Edgar's theory of root races, every time before a root race entered the physical world, it was preceded by cataclysm. Atlantis, Lemuria, you know, the fourth root race, it was all predicated by some kind of geophysical disturbance. I think we're coming up on that point again.
Yeah, I can sense it. I can feel it. I can see it.
Just there's just too much in the world right now that's in chaos. You know, what it is that's coming, I don't know. But I've also been, you know, aware of what I call extraterrestrial intelligence. We're not the only life in the universe. I think that's the most ridiculous idea I've ever heard. But they're here, they're observing. I think they've been here all along, but they're not hiding anymore. I mean, just in the last few weeks, it's been amazing to watch how much is being videotaped all of a sudden. They're really watching, and I think we're getting closer and closer to that axis point or pivot point in our history or future history, whatever you want to call it, where I think it's like a pressure cooker, if you will, of, you know, population explosion. Same thing happened in Atlantis. You had this huge technological advance, population increase, and then a sudden decrease. And yet some survived. Some minorities survived. Some small number survived. It's like this pressure cooker builds and builds and builds, and then transforms a small number, but it's based on the pressure of the consensus reality, if you will. And then that small number break free and create another understanding of reality. I think Edgar's predicting it.
Yeah.
And I think he's showing us the way to, I think Christ, if you will, at each point has always stepped in and said, here's the way to survive the transition. It'll be interesting to see if we do it.
Yeah.
I know it's an internal alchemy. I know it's based on hypnosis and at least initially overcoming that dichotomy between conscious and subconscious. He's describing that. And I think essentially hypnosis is the way to bypass that dichotomy.
Yeah, because I'm amazed that, I mean, for me, I exist, and that's an amazement in itself. Or every person exists, having their own existence. So to exist is just amazing in itself. Like, you know that you're a individual, then you're in a body as well. So okay, I'll accept that. And then you got, like, you know, roughly about 80 or 90 years on planet Earth to do your thing. So that's but then something happens after that. You go where you're gonna go and how you're gonna come back, if you're gonna come back. So
right.
And I was like here before. If Edgar Cayce's life readings are true, that means I was here many times before. So there's a journey. Everybody has their own journey. So we're all sort of part of something.
Yeah.
And the problem is we keep coming back. Then we have to restart all over again. And
that's one of my biggest so far is
why do we have to restart? You know, like,
you couldn't have shown this to me and given it to me in such a clear way during my near-death experience when I was 12, so that I could write the book and become rich and not have to worry about survival. But you make me work at this for 25 years.
Like, figure out.
And I'm still trying to figure out the rest of it. I'm sitting here going, it's been 4 years so far just on Revelations to get halfway through Revelations. Based on Edgar Cayce.
Yeah, it's like,
honestly, I have Puryear's book, I have Iron's book, I have Von Achen's book, I have one other book, something consciousness. It's a relatively older book. I spent a fortune on it. But when you look at all of their information combined, they're really not saying that much. They're really not saying that much, and but it's there. It's just not put in a coherent way. I mean, when I look at Edgar's revelations, okay, he's talking about, you know, transforming our memories and, you know, recalling things, etc. At least he is so far. How does Revelations become practical within Edgar's paradigm? That's when I started to really think, okay, so I looked at Edgar's overall method, and there's a few little dichotomies which I'm beginning to figure out, but he talks about ideals.
Oh, yeah.
That's the first arm of the cross, and specifically the Christ ideal. That second arm is prayer, and more specifically, the Lord's Prayer. It's the beginning of meditation. You basically prepare for meditation. You create the environment. You light incense, and you do the chanting, etc., and whatnot. And then you invoke protection, which is essentially the Lord's Prayer. You kind of like start the engine, so to speak. Then, and I haven't quite got into this yet because it's a deep one. I know it. I'm gonna beg for mercy by the end of it. is the affirmations.
Oh yeah. The focus.
The 12th through 15th chapter is on affirmations, and very specifically on a search for God affirmations.
Yeah, because I was always wondering. Yeah, you're saying that because I always wondered the 281 readings I collected all of them. I put it all out on my YouTube channel. But how they went through each affirmation, they must have just focused on it all week, every week until they move on to the next affirmation. Then
the other day I was sitting there working on my chart, and I was like, all of a sudden it popped in again, and I was like, the 12 affirmations, or if you want to count the second volume, 24 affirmations within the search for God, what are they exactly addressing?
Yeah.
It's the 12 cranial nerves.
Yeah.
So the Lord's Prayer is literally talking about those lower, purifying those 4 lower chakras or centers, right? And then the affirmations are about cleaning, if you will, the 24 cranial nerves. And I was like, oh, that's a trip. So I know I'm in for it when I start working on that, because that's going to be deep. And then when you get into silent meditation, which, you know, per year actually, and his wife talked about it. I actually had a reading from a medium recently. His name is, he's since stopped doing readings, etc., because he wants a personal life. But I was trying to figure out, okay, so I'm doing this revelations thing. I'm like, okay, what happens when I get to the end of it?
Yeah.
What is the point of all this? What's the end goal of all this?
You solved.
And what's that? You solved?
You solved the puzzle, the problem.
Yeah, but then how is it practical?
I don't
Is
know.
it practical? That was my primary
I'll put
question.
it in another way. Irion, because what's his name? Irion. He wrote before that. He said he wrote the first book called Vibrations, and it took him so many years, maybe 10 or 20. Then it took him so many years to write the book of Vibrations. I mean, the book of Revelation that we're reading now. So what happened to him? Like after he
he wrote a third book on dreams too, which
that's right. Oh yeah. I do have that. So
that was another really weird one I found online. I was like, oh, you wrote a third one?
Yeah.
And
I actually have a copy of that in my bookcase. I forgot.
Yeah. So, but this medium, he didn't really understand what he was getting. So I showed him the symbol.
Yeah.
And it was immediate. He goes, oh, you're a healer. And I stopped and I was like, oh, wait a minute, what? The meditation isn't necessarily silent meditation entirely. It's healing meditation.
Oh, yes, yeah.
That's the practical aspect of what Edgar Cayce is talking about. It's about becoming healers.
Yeah. Well, that was the purpose of their group too, like the 281 group.
I was floored when he said that. I was like, oh wow, now I got, you know, smacked right in the face. I'm like, now that's when the real work begins.
Yeah. And healing doesn't have to be miraculous or like
No, it can be very, very subtle.
And it doesn't also have to be physical. It can be spiritual, mental, where you're helping others to help themselves. And so even being in their presence and saying a few words to them can be a form of healing.
Right. But it needs to be, there's the same thing as manifesting. It needs to be spirit guided.
Yeah,
or
that's it.
Inspired. That's the one thing that I'm not seeing to a great degree within quote unquote manifesting circles, etc. It's always about manifesting physical things,
money, cars, house.
Right. I mean, which in and of itself I don't necessarily see a problem with, but the motivation feels off to me when I hear that kind of thing. And so I was like, a few years ago, as I was studying this stuff, I also got into spiritualism and mediumship, because that was kind of like an offshoot with Edgar. He didn't necessarily believe in communicating with the dead. During his meditation, he would bypass them and go straight to the Akashic records, which again is fine. And he had various quote unquote angels that would communicate with him and offer to be his guide and so forth. And he rejected them and said, no, God is my only guide. And yet, at the same time, I was thinking, you know, the mediumship in and of itself is an interesting phenomena, because it too developed at the same time as our understanding of the mind, at the same time that the idea of manifesting was starting to come across, all of which was motivated by non-physical intelligence. So to me, it's like, okay, I'm looking at mediumship and I've practiced and I have some ability. I feel like a kindergartner, but I'm looking at
but
as
maybe
gaining information.
maybe because the mistake of people thinking that the grass is always greener on the other side, like it's
But it is.
Yeah. It's like the stuff from out of the world is better than what we rather than enjoy and
Yeah,
enjoy your life.
to me, it's not what I experienced on the other side when I had my near-death experience, and in my few out-of-body experiences where I have that experience again to some degree. It is greener.
Mm.
But the one thing that I have learned from the other side, quote unquote, other side, is that their goal has always been to direct us towards source, love, light, and life, and an understanding of the three laws: love, karma, and grace. So just quickly, the law of love is giving. Edgar then didn't really describe the other two. He just basically said God is loving. It's in the Bible. It's pretty straightforward. I could see where Edgar would repeat that. As I kept reading Edgar's readings, all of a sudden it dawned on me, karma is getting what you gave. It's automatic.
Yeah.
And grace, by proxy, if you will, is gratitude. It's also forgiving.
Yeah, but the other thing about grace is that you got to be busy all the time, because when you're very busy, then helping others and doing good, forgiving, all that stuff
has to be for others.
Yeah. So when you're busy with that, then hopefully your other past sins will become forgiven, or karma will be wiped out.
What Edgar
You got to be busy all the time.
You bypass the karma of your actions or negative actions by doing for others.
Yeah, and then you'll be busy.
But you also, by recognizing the lesson within the karma, within your everyday experience, he says this quite explicitly, is within the grace is within your everyday experience. The grace is within the karma. So, like, for example, to me, the prime directive, if you will, love, necessitates free will, because God only creates in relationship. That's the only reason he had to create was for relationship. But that necessitated free will, which then necessitated the expression of the law of karma. The law of karma, in turn, then necessitated the law of grace. So it becomes full circle.
Yeah, and that's what, because sometimes people ask Edgar Cayce for specific advice, but he wouldn't hear. You have to make those decisions. You can't,
That's what I've learned from mediumship too. The spirits,
they can't,
the dead, etc., they will not, my experience, they will not tell you what to do. They'll give you ideas or potentials, but I don't know of any time where they've actually given predictions.
Yeah.
I mean, in various writings early on, people claim that they gave predictions, but 9 times out of 10, they were inaccurate. When I read earlier works on spiritualism, etc., that I'm sure Edgar had access to, they're describing the other side as being a perfect ideal of the physical. They have jobs, they have houses, they have kids, they have families, they have this, they have that. It's an idealized physical world without any of the negativity. My personal feeling and my personal experience was maybe limited, I don't know, but that reality, that other side, if you will, goes way beyond any conception of the physical that we have right now. If you're in it long enough. And I think initially there's that sense of physicality to it, but I think that as we evolve deeper into that experience, the longer that we're out of body, the less identified we are with the physical world. That was my experience. And it's just been fascinating to me how And I don't really understand why, maybe I never will, but why a symbol I got in a dream makes so much damn sense in the Edgar Cayce readings. And why it takes so long to get an understanding of it. There's a number of people, Puryear himself, who's very, he made the attempt and he did a very good job of doing it, of trying to explain Edgar's paradigm. But in all my reading up to present, there's very little that doesn't require a hell of a lot of study to get there. To really make it practical in everyday life.
That's why, like the purpose of my YouTube channel was never to solve anything about Edgar Cayce, but was to instill that interest, and then get them to go and do their own search, like personal search, because everybody.
The problem that I have with that particular thought process is you only have at most 80, 90, 100 years to really get an understanding of what the physical world is really about. And then you're dead. And you're sitting there going, well, that was a waste of time. I got to do this again. I'm like, screw that. I want out. I mean, that's why I'm Buddhist. We believe in samsara and the realm of suffering and getting off that wheel. It's like this merry-go-round's old. I want to be able to. There's a guy named William Bowman. If you ever get the chance to read his stuff, he works through the Monroe Institute now out there in Virginia as well.
He wrote any books?
He wrote a book called Adventures Beyond the Body. He's written about 5 of them, I think now.
What's that? Adventures
Beyond the Body.
Beyond the Body. Okay. I'll have
he is way ahead of his time. Way ahead of his time. He, in my estimation, if you combine that with my understanding of Edgar Cayce and mediumship, boom, it'll blow your mind. It's just amazing what he can do. I'm like, and then there's Stephen Greer, who talks about communicating with extraterrestrial intelligence, if you will, or interdimensional intelligences. I'm like, this would accelerate human evolution like you couldn't believe if it was accepted on a more practical level.
But I think
there's research into this, but there isn't. There's very little research into it.
I think we all have a role to do, is to help others to lift themselves up, to a certain level. So even though what we sound like we're not doing much, but it might be important
on an individual level. I think we do as much as we can within our little corner of our world. The people that we interact with, etc. That's the one thing I like about Edgar. He says it's not about creating a mass movement, or creating a new religion, which may be part of the reason why they don't really, the Edgar Cayce Foundation doesn't really spell it out.
No, they're not supposed
to. They want people to come to this understanding on their own. There again, you want to violate somebody's free will, has nasty consequences. But this idea of just on an individual basis, on a case-by-case basis, of presenting information of the possibility of healing.
And that's what they do, where you come, okay, I'm looking for this, here's the information here, this is the books here, this is this. But we're not gonna.
So I mean, I wish I could have voided out 25 years worth of really hard research. I mean, like I said, I've read this book alone 11 times. I've got the darn thing here memorized and still don't understand it.
But you're ahead of others, though. So that's why it's good to sort of.
I'm just going based on the symbol. I'm like, okay, does this make sense within the context of the symbol? Just within the last few weeks, I looked at this idea of the 12 tribes, and I'm going, where do they fit in with this? And I was like, boom. There's the key. Now I'm real interested to see how he works with the mind itself when you get past chapter 11.
Because, Joseph had 12 brothers, and Joseph was the past life of Jesus, and then Jesus had 12 disciples.
12 is a significant number.
So there's something going on there.
And there again, the 12 pairs of cranial nerves.
Yeah, and then 12. So there's a
He's
link.
talking about a biological process.
Yeah.
I did a really in-depth study. Have you ever heard of Zecharia Sitchin?
Oh yeah,
These days.
whole collection.
Get this, when I was in high school, I had a world history teacher, beginning of the class, the semester. He was like an 80-year-old teacher. He was a funny little old guy, but he gives us the textbook about a week ahead before the class started, and then we get to the class, and he says, "Okay, at the end of the semester, you have to give a 1-minute speech or 2-minute speech, and these are the topics." He wrote about 20 topics on the blackboard, and I had taken the book home with me and started reading it, of course, ahead of time, and because I was a royal nerd when I was a kid. And I was looking at him going, well, the first thing the book says is Greeks weren't the cradle of civilization. Now, all of a sudden, this place over in Iraq called Sumer is. Okay, fine, whatever. And the description of the Sumerians is that they moved from hunter-gatherers to cities. They had a complete mathematical system. They understood astronomy. They had an understanding of the universe far in advance of anybody else around them. No explanation whatsoever about why or how they got that explanation. So being the smart ass that I was, I'd been reading into metaphysics and UFOs and all kinds of shit for a while. And I happened across Zecharia Sitchin's first 2 books, The 12th Planet and Stairway to Heaven. And so I went up to the teacher at the end of the first class and I said, well, I don't like any of those topics. He goes, well, aren't you that? And I was like, well, I'll tell you what, I'll explain where the Sumerians got their information.
Well, so at least you put interest on others, your other students that go, okay, there's something.
Yeah, I picked on them pretty bad, because again, the Sumerians, in their understanding of, or Zechariah's interpretation of the Sumerians, I should qualify that a little bit. He talks about how extraterrestrials came down to Earth, created mankind, gave them technology, gave them an understanding of the universe, etc., created us as slaves. Slavery is a big theme for some reason within the human psyche. This idea of violating another being's free will is a big thing in the human soul. But how then the gods left us on our own, basically, but they said they'd come back. And I'm just kind of, did they really leave, or did they just kind of go underground, or whatever they did, because now all of a sudden we're seeing things that are far in advance of our own technology, and the information that's coming through even humans in a quote unquote metaphysical sense is telling us that there's something hidden within our DNA, in particular within our junk DNA, what we consider our junk DNA, that essentially would give us immortality, as well as knowledge beyond what we have now. And Edgar is implying the same thing.
I have sort of a, because we have to shift the way we see things from just the 3-dimensional, limited, that there's one day there won't be any more 3-dimensional experiences.
In order to do that, the first step is close your eyes.
So we need.
That's the first step, is to go non-physical and close your eyes. And
because we hold on to this 3-dimensional world too much that we think.
Oh yeah, totally. Mediumship, William Bowman, Edgar Cayce, everything is saying literally lose the sensation of the physical world, and you will automatically be able to transit the physical world in an interdimensional way. You become conscious of the soul itself.
But do you want to let go of the physical world?
Oh, yeah, there's a big part of me that does, but at the same time, I understand its necessity. So it's an alternating. Like, for example, William Bowman talks about out-of-body stuff. And I love out-of-body travel. when I had my near-death experience and I came back, it was hard to stay in the body. I literally had to concentrate very hard in order to stay in the physical body. I had to basically retrain myself to stay in the physical body. And then now it's reversed itself. It's actually kind of difficult to get out of body. I have this transition phase where I'm not conscious, and then I'll wake up, if you will, out of body. Then I can do whatever I want. But even though I can do that while the body sleeps, eventually the body has to wake up. That information that I gain from out of body experiences, it's all great and good and wonderful, blah, blah, blah. You know, okay, I had this out of body experience. I did this, I did that. But if it's not practical to right now, what the hell use is it? Right? I mean, like, okay, great. I understand that we live beyond the physical body. I understand that I have a consciousness that exists beyond the physical body. What purpose does that have while I'm in the body? How does that make me better as a person? That's the essence of it.
Yeah.
All of Edgar Cayce's teaching, if you look at it, narrows down to two things: selfishness in the body and unselfishness that we gain an understanding of outside of the body. We gain that understanding, we glean that sense of the purpose for unselfishness. We get that from the non-physical aspects of ourselves. We don't get that from the physical. When we're in the physical, it's about, I have a favorite saying within Buddhist meditation is, you know, we meditate on emptiness and these very exalted mental states that Buddhists and Hindus and so forth, yogis can develop. You know, it's what my mother used to call mental masturbation. Sorry for that term, but it really fits. But the minute you have to pee, bam, you're right back in the physical body. You can't concentrate on anything else. It's like gone. You could be out of body traveling in the farthest reaches of the galaxy. The minute you got to pee, bam, you're right back in the body.
Oh, well, that's good talking to you. I guess that's,
yeah.
We have to have another session, maybe another time.
Yeah, when I get done with the second half in about 4 years. I'm gonna put this chart up that I'm developing up online again once I get it done. Because that first chart was using Excel and it kind of gave me an idea, and I thought, oh, I'll share it and see what people think and so forth. And then as I did that, I very quickly developed other questions. I'm like, oh, this is not complete.
Okay.
So I want to get this through. I'm desperately trying to get through chapter 11 so that it's at least done halfway. And then I'll switch over to the affirmations and that fun stuff. Hopefully this will make it easier. I'm hoping once I get the system down, it'll make it much easier.
Hold on.
So, yeah, hold on to my seat. Well, thanks. I really appreciate talking with you.
Yeah, we'll talk again.
I'm gonna bug you to death.
We will talk again. Definitely.
All right. You take care.
Okay. See you.
All right. God bless.
Thanks. Listen.
Bye.